Hello there, my saucy flamingos. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me. Today, I think I want to go there, guys. I think I want to talk about the subject of hexes. I'm a little bit apprehensive because I know this can be a contentious subject, since, of course, hexes are generally workings that we put onto someone to cause them harm or misfortune. And so I know that there are some ethical quandaries and definitely some differences of opinion and very strong opinions. And I'm very, very up for knowing your opinions. Please use the comments section, okay? As long as you can be civil, please play nice. Let's all have our different points of view and enrich each other with that. I'm definitely going to be giving some of my points of view as well. This is going to be interesting for me because I did talk about my response to the idea of hexing a long time ago on the channel, but I think my views have really updated and I want to give you a little bit of idea of where I am at the current place and time. So this will be interesting to get into. I think there's no time like the present. I might make a few more videos on this subject if I feel like it's something that you want to see from me. So slap a like on it if you want to hear more from my perspective. But for this video, let's just get into a little bit around the ethical side of it, what I think of it now, and some different ideas for hexing if it's something that you are considering or something that you feel like it's in your framework but you want to tighten it up a little bit. This is going to be a very interesting one. So yeah, there's no time like the present. Let's just get into it. For a long time, I was a practitioner that said that I would never hex. It wasn't in my framework. I wasn't about it. But even when I was saying that, I still never thought that putting a blanket moral ban on hexes entirely was an ethical thing either. Because when I imagined a witch doing a hex, it wasn't always like a witch punishing someone who didn't want to go on a date with them, or punishing someone who didn't give them a job, you know, or a witch just basically hexing someone that they were jealous of or felt generally malicious towards. I can understand why those kinds of hexes might be deemed unethical, and why that might be a sign that actually the practitioner just needs to go away and do a little bit of shadow work, you know. But I often imagine that a witch doing a hex would be a witch whose back was up against the wall, who was marginalised or undervalued or disenfranchised in some way, and maybe hexing was their only way to get any kind of level playing field, you know. Maybe they don't have any judicial recourse, maybe they don't have any societal support. So we're thinking about marginalised witches, right? Trans and queer witches, poor witches, witches that have been abused over and over again. We're thinking about homeless witches. We're thinking about witches that have got these really big systemic problems that they're dealing with for themselves and their family, and they're fighting against massive systems of oppression or discrimination. And I think when it comes to the idea of those witches using hexes, it puts a very different spin on it, doesn't it? It gives it quite a bit of nuance. There are also, of course, witches that want to punish their abuser or punish somebody else's abuser, punish somebody that's never going to see their day in court. And so it's a way to level that playing field. It's a way to claw some power back and to feel like they have been able to like enact some kind of punishment on that person. There are plenty of people that want to see somebody punished for harming them in a very deep, terrible way. And so if they don't have access to the means of getting that punishment, of course, they might want to prescribe it themselves in their sorcery. I also think of collective hexes, you know, where a bunch of witches get together and they do a hex on someone, even though the witches might not even know each other. They agree that they're all going to hex someone or a group of people or a system or an ideology that has a great deal of power, magnified power. And so witches will come together and utilize their power together to kind of like weaken that person or that ideology or that sort of very tyrannical system that is keeping them or others down. So even when I didn't want to do hexes for myself personally, I could still see that there were some very nuanced reasons why they would be more than reasonable and why witches would think of them to be a part of their framework. So yeah, I don't think a blanket moral ban or a blanket moral disapproval on all hexing is probably the most ethical way to go either. Before I talk a little bit about where hexing currently falls in my magical framework, I just want to differentiate between hexes and curses, okay? For me personally, a curse is something that is a lot more weighted. It is way more long-term, if not lifelong, you know. The repercussions of that are going to be felt for years and years and years. And a curse is something that I probably think of as like something that permeates all of the water of a person's life and really messes with them. Whereas a hex is something that I think is more directional. You can, well, I can hex a specific part of a person's life rather than the whole of their life. And I can hex as a more short-term kind of like bitch slap, you know, a reaction to a specific situation that's happened and something that will be intended to wear off. I will program it to wear off. And that is why I prefer to use the term hex as opposed to the term curse. Please get at me down below if you have different definitions for these things. But what I've found from working with a lot of witches is that curses are intended to be those weighted, those lifelong, those really serious workings. Whereas hexes, even though of course we want them to have a result in the life of the receiver, it's definitely something that is intended to wear off, or it's intended to be like only for that specific situation that has made us want to put the hex together. So that's kind of how I think of it in terms of definitions. I'm personally much more comfortable with the idea of hexing now as a witch. This might come as a surprise to some of you who have been around a long time and watched the previous video and kind of have come to understand my framework, but yeah, that's how I see it. And there are a few different reasons for that. The first reason is that I don't think of hexing as anywhere near as an extreme of an act as I used to think it was. I now no longer think it's a really big deal if I want to mete out a little bit of punishment to somebody. I really don't. And I don't see why I wouldn't use magic to achieve that punishment. I used to think of hexing as something that was really extreme and probably would corrupt my spirit or my ethics as the result of doing it. And I just genuinely don't think that anymore. I would also say that I think these days I've got a much better grasp on when I actually want to and need to hex somebody, you know, whereas earlier in my life, I don't think I was that aware of that because I wasn't as deep into my own self-development. I wasn't as self-reflective. I wasn't as good at looking at what was my work to do and what was somebody else's work to do, which would have made me more emotionally irresponsible as somebody that could consider hexing somebody. So I really wanted to know that if I was ever going to do something like that, it would be for absolutely righteous reasons. And I don't think I fully trusted myself in that regard earlier in life. I will say that in the past, when I've talked about not wanting to hex people, there have been witches that have come into my comments section and said things like, oh, I'm glad that you had such an amazing positive life that nobody ever hurt you enough that you would want to hex them. And that was quite the misreading of what I've been through as a human being. I have been massively hurt, hugely betrayed, and heinously fucked over. And yet I did not feel like hexing. So it's not to do with that. It's not like, oh, over the last few years, a few things happened that made me feel like I had the right to hex someone. No, I think I've always had the right to hex someone. It just didn't feel like something that was responsible. It felt like something that was over the top, and it felt like something that would mess with me, mess with my sense of self, and end up making me feel like I was very at odds with who I think of myself to be and want myself to be. And I just no longer feel that way. I also used to be the kind of witch that would say things like, well, if someone's treating me really badly, I don't need to hex them, because if they are behaving so abominably, they're already hurting themselves, they're already hexing themselves. I don't need to do anything to help them along with that process, because somewhere inside of them, they're already feeling bad and they're already putting things into motion that are going to mess up their life. So I don't need to come in and like further fuck around with their sort of like karmic consequences. And I don't really feel like that anymore either. But whenever I do feel like that, I know that it's not time to put out any kind of hex, right? But I don't always feel that way. Sometimes I feel like it's definitely my right to be able to exact some kind of punishment, to be able to level the playing field, to be able to kind of like, you know, give that cosmic bitch slap and let somebody know about themselves in spiritual terms. And I might sound like I'm the kind of person that's doing a hex every other day. No, absolutely not. I'm just trying to clarify for you how much more comfortable I feel with that whole notion now, and how I don't feel like it has like really bad moral consequences on me. And I don't feel that it is always the case that because somebody's mistreating me, they're mistreating themselves, and that must be coming through in their life. Like, I've just rationalized it out with various situations and realized that like, it's not always like that 100% of the time. And I do feel like I have the right to take magical actions in certain regards that I might not have done before. So take that and do with it what you will. Another reason that I think for me hexing has become less dramatic, less unacceptable and more normative is because I'm way more sure of my energy and my power now. And I do think that if you're going to do something that looks anything like a hex, you really need to have, if possible, as much control over your power as you can. Because for me, I don't want to direct something that's going to affect people or situations that I did not want to have affected, you know? If I'm sending a hex, I do not want other people to be hit by that hex. If I'm sending a hex, I do not want it to end up poisoning all of the water when I only wanted it to go towards this well, right? So I really want to feel like I'm in control of what I'm doing with the hex and making sure that I'm directing it accordingly and like really, really laser sharp focus. I don't think I felt that I had that before in my life. You live, you learn, you get better as a witch, you become a more sophisticated practitioner. And I guess I'm giving myself my flowers right now in saying that that's me. So if at any point I ever wanted to hex somebody, I would always know from this point on that like, I can direct that. I can make that happen in the way that I want it to happen. And there's not going to be any massive cosmic errors, big spills, big mistakes, you know, like The Apprentice in Fantasia where it all goes wrong. I just don't think I'm in that kind of situation anymore. I am very adept at the craft and I am confident in my ability. I also used to say to myself quite a lot in the past that whenever I felt like this rage and this indignation and this resentment at somebody that had wronged me, that was energy that I could use rather than harming them, instead to use it to heal myself or whoever else has been hurt, and use that energy to rebuild and nurture and, you know, just really like heal, basically make things better, rather than balling it all up and using it to hurt or punish or take that person down a peg or two. I'm going to take that rage and I'm going to alchemize it into assisting myself and my community, the other people that have been harmed, and really get us to where we want to be. So I had that very distinct idea that my energy of rage should be directed somewhere useful. Whereas nowadays I feel like, you know, the cake of my energy can be cut in a few different ways. I don't need to only give my energy towards healing and rebuilding and like, you know, making sure that the things that were broken get to come back together and be whole again. I can do that, but I can also mete out justice. I can also send out a little bit of a kick in the butt or a little bit of a fuck you. I can do both of those things. So I've become a lot more nuanced about that now. I think I used to be a lot more black and white about that. So as my practice began to change in relation to hexing, and I started thinking about, okay, maybe this is something that I've really changed my mind about. How would I bring that possibility into my magical toolkit in an ethical way? I thought about the fact that I would want to categorize various different types of hexing. I'm a Virgo moon and I really, really love categorizing. I like putting things into kind of like different lanes so I can see what I'm looking at. And I think if I've got different types of hex that vary in style and severity, then that really allows me to not screw things up and to do the hexing from a very conscious place and to really know what it means to me and what it is that I'm trying to achieve. So I want to take you through some of the categories now of various different hexes and how I think that they are appropriate for different things. So the first kind of like category of hex that I came up with was the super specific hex. And that's basically a hex where instead of hexing an entire person and their entire life for a period of time or whatever, I would instead hex one particular aspect of their life, like their career or whatever it might be, one particular creative project that they're doing, one aim or ambition that they have in mind. Other than that, I could also hex a part of them, you know? So if there are various different parts of them and I see them as distinct and I've witnessed them, I can decide, okay, that part of them, that's the part where I'm sending the hex. I'm not hexing the whole person. I'm hexing those set of characteristics and behaviors that come out in that person that I think really need a little bit of a hex. They're just asking for a bit of a hex. So that's that super specific energy, okay? And that's one way of being really sophisticated about magic that you're sending out that has that kind of like angry fuck you vibe and you want it to do something in that person's life. You can be very specific about where exactly you want that to land, okay? You do not have to send it to a person's entire life and their entire beingness. You can be clear about whereabouts in their life you want them to experience the energy of that hex, and you can decide that it might actually be one aspect of them in particular that you would like to receive that hex. The bitch slap is quite a nice hexing technique. You know, it's basically like, this isn't going to last for a very long time. It's not going to have a very sort of like far-reaching effect on your life. I don't want it to permeate everything. I basically just want to give you a little bitch slap, okay? It's going to be over pretty soon, but while it's happening to you, you're going to be feeling it. So The bitch slap hex cannot be underrated, my darlings. I'm sure some of you know what I mean. It's basically not that serious, but it's going to be serious enough that you're going to think twice before doing that again. Another kind of category of hex that I identified when I was going through this exploration was the rude awakening, or the long, hard look in the mirror. It's basically a hex that makes somebody see themselves, look at themselves, awaken to the fuckery that they've been engaged in. So it's really not allowing that person to sleep their life away in this delusional idea that they did nothing wrong, or that they can carry on with their misgivings and their transgressions, you know. So that kind of like rude awakening is a hex that is only really designed to go towards that person, hit them in the conscience, and really just like knock them on their arse thinking about everything that they have done and how they want to change that. I also thought about a category that's more kind of like a time-based hex, you know. So maybe you want to give somebody a bit of a shitty week, maybe you want to give somebody a bad luck day. So it's just basically timed, and at the end of that, the hex kind of like falls away. You program it so that it dissolves naturally, but it's just kind of like, you know, a little bit of a short-term negative time for that person, a little bit of a bad time. Nothing too extreme is going to befall them, but it's just not going to be great. They're going to like drop their coffee everywhere, or they're going to like fuck up at work, and they're just generally going to feel like nothing is going right for them. So it's a little bit of a, you know, a low stakes hex, but I think sometimes that's what a person really feels like they want to send towards somebody in certain circumstances. One kind of hex that I thought about in my categorizations, if you will, is kind of like the double locked door type of hex. So you're basically stopping any good opportunities from coming through for that person for a while. If you know that that person is shooting for things in their life, if they're ambitious, if they're going after stuff, then the double locked door would be the kind of hex that would just lock all those good juicy avenues that they're going for. It would prevent them for a time from elevating their life, from experiencing momentum forward in the ways that they want to. As I mentioned earlier when I was talking about, you know, hexes not generally always being unethical in every situation, I mentioned that there is such a thing as like the collective hex, right? The community hex, where a bunch of people get together and they are all sending that energy towards something that they want to see topple, or somebody that they want to see exposed. And I think that's definitely, for me, a personal category that I would consider. And I definitely think that made a lot of sense to me when people did that with, what was his name, Brock Turner, or when they did it with Trump or whatever, or when they do it with certain ideologies and certain like geopolitical things that are playing out. So I think that's also a category that I would consider, and that I don't think is really like beyond my ethical framework to mess around with if the time comes. Another way that I think I can categorize a hex would be as a catharsis hex. So that's really for me than it is for the other person. And I actually program that into the working. I think that's really important. Hexes are obviously incredibly cathartic. They allow you to ball up all of your rage and your anger and your sense of injustice, and like really put it out towards that person. If I don't really want to put it out towards them that much, but I really want to hex them for the feeling of it, right? Then for me, it might be mostly about release, like 90% about release and expression for me. And then like 10%, you know, they'll feel 10% of what I actually put out in the hex, because the hex is more for my nervous system. It's for my sense of self. It's for what I want to feel while I'm going through the motions of hexing. And then actually the energy that I've got to send out, I'm going to be sending them a tiny little bit of what came up in that catharsis hex, because in that, you know, in the sort of process of doing that hex, it's really for me to get out my righteous indignation, to feel that I've exercised it from myself. And maybe I do want to, you know, like ping a little bit of it over onto them, but it's not going to be a massive amount. I know there are going to be some witches that are listening to this video and they're clutching all their invisible pearls and they're like, Kellyanne, what the hell are you talking about? You cannot do any of these things. It's just not okay in any circumstances. And again, I hear you. Get at me down below. Let me know your opinions. There is no censorship here on my channel unless people are being hateful and like completely out of line, in which case, you know, I will obviously 86 you right out of the club. But in general, I would love to hear your thoughts and feelings. I'm not going to be revealing the extent to which I have done any hexing, but I do want to assure you it's not a very great deal, okay? A lot of stuff I want to solve in other ways, and a lot of things, even though I initially initially feel impulsively that I might want to hex, I always give myself the opportunity to journal about it, to ask my beings if I need to consult with those disembodied intelligences that I work with. And very often, a lot of the time, a hex is not really the thing that I choose anyway. I think the point I'm trying to make with this video is that it is on the table now as an option for me. It's in the witchy toolkit, whereas it really was not before. And I definitely think that's a really interesting departure for me from my former points of view. So I wanted to share that and put that out there as well. And so, my darlings, it is over to you. What do you think of hexing? If you're feeling very brave, you can let us know whether or not you've ever done one before. What are your views about the fact that hexing is often so frowned upon and that there is so much contentious discussion around it? I'm very curious to know what you think and feel. Slap a like on the video if you enjoyed, get subscribed if you're not already, go onto my website to check out my wares, check out my Patreon, all that good stuff. You can come and work with me one-on-one or join the Patreon party, which is a party that never sleeps. Much love, my darlings, and until next time, blessed be. Mwah.